All right. Well, let's begin. Hello and welcome. It's great to see you all here today. Welcome to the virtual colloquium series In Conversation, Arts and Culture for Well-Being, organized by the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project at the University of Pennsylvania. My name is James Powelski. I am professor of practice and director of education in the Positive Psychology Center at Penn, and the founding director of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to those who are joining us live and to those who are watching the recorded version of today's event. The mission of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project is to understand, assess, and advance the well-being effects and benefits of engagement in arts and culture, focusing on individual and collective human flourishing. We're grateful for support from the Drew and H.J. Heinz II Charitable Trust and the National Endowment for the Arts, which has designated the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project as an NEA research lab and is supportive both of practice-informed research and research-informed practice in the arts, culture, and well-being. You can find out much more about the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, including our publications and how to sign up for our newsletter, on our website at www.humanities-and-human-flourishing.org. Thank you, Sarah, for putting that link in the chat. Today, we are thrilled to continue our colloquium series, which features presentations by and discussions between scientists and practitioners on topics concerning the arts, culture, and well-being. Before we turn to our distinguished speakers for today, let me preview the plan for this colloquium. Now, if you've joined us previously, you know that we typically hear a presentation from a researcher and one from a practitioner, and then enter into conversation with them. Today, we're very fortunate to have two guests who are long-term collaborators and will be giving an integrated presentation on their research and also, very uniquely and specially, leading us in a 15-minute meditation practice based on their work. So I will begin by introducing both speakers now, and after their joint presentation and the meditation practice, I'll facilitate a discussion with them and also a Q&A with all of you. At any point during the session, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat. If you'd like to share these verbally, please wait until we open it up for audience participation toward the end of our time together, and then raise your Zoom hand. With that, let's turn to our two speakers. And again, I'll introduce both of them here at the beginning. So our first speaker is Dr. Roksana Filipowska. I'll get it from one fellow Pole to another. The problem is Powelski has been, sort of anglicized so long that we pronounce the W as a W and not how it should be pronounced as more of a V sound in the Polish. So Filipowska, the purest kind of version. So Dr. Roksana Filipowska works at the intersection of the arts, science, and wholeness. She completed her doctorate in art history at the University of Pennsylvania and served as the outreach manager at the Yale University Art Gallery. Since developing Being Present with Art, a method for integrating mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation, MBSR, for those of you who are familiar with it, integrating MBSR with art museum pedagogy, Roksana has curated in-person, hybrid, and remote courses, workshops, and retreats grounded in the method at Yale University, the Barnes Foundation, and for nursing graduate students in the greater Philadelphia area. As an arts and equity consultant with keen independent research, Roksana researches how participation in arts and culture impacts individual and community well-being and local economic development. And our second speaker is Dr. Hannah Weinberg-Wolf, who combines a background in cognitive science and museum studies. She completed her MA in museum studies from Johns Hopkins and her Ph.D. in cognitive psychology from Yale. As a Wordle Gallery teaching fellow at Yale University Art Gallery, she engaged visitors in art, building key skills using question-based pedagogies and cultivating partnerships with homeschool groups, student writing clubs, seniors programs, and accessibility programs. She's also spent 10 plus years conducting evaluative research at museums spanning art, natural history, and living collections. As a UX research manager at a Fortune 500 company, she now leverages her experience in qualitative and quantitative research to understand customer needs in order to design novel and elegant solutions. Roksana, Hannah, we're delighted to have you with us today, and we very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, James, for the invitation. Hannah and I both so appreciate getting a chance to tune in with you all. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the support in getting us here, and for everyone at the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. Both Hannah and I are admirers of the work that you do, and myself as an alumna of the University of Pennsylvania, it definitely feels great to do a homecoming of sorts with this presentation. Hannah, I think that we can start with sharing our screen, and just wanted to acknowledge everyone who is in the virtual room with us. Hello, thank you so much for spending your morning on the East Coast with us. It's great to see so many familiar names, and for anybody tuning into the recording, thanks so much. All right, so today we are presenting on being present with art. It is a method, there's also a study, and we're also going to be talking about the beyond, the applications of being present with art. We are going to introduce the timeline. This can get a little confusing as to where Hannah and I were at what time, so we'll introduce a timeline to the collaboration. I will speak about the method. Hannah will present study overview and findings. We will be doing a demonstration of the method. So for this, I highly encourage you all to, if you don't have a piece of paper, you may wish to have a piece of paper. It's great to have a pen or colored pencils or pencil nearby. There'll be a drawing component, and we'll also be doing an interactive component as well. And the heart of our time together today is our discussion. So just know that if you have any questions as we're speaking, please put them in the chat, and we would love to hear from you. All right, let's begin. Okay, so the being present with art timeline. First of all, there's a QR code here. So if you haven't gotten a chance to check out the article on the research study, we did link it through the QR code. So just know that there's a lot more information in the article than we're probably going to cover today about the details of the study and the collaboration. Just know that that's available to you. The being present with art method crystallized for me in the spring of 2020. It was absolutely motivated and due to the need of teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just like many educators and faculty members, my colleagues and I at the Yale University Art Gallery, those of us who taught with the gallery's collection, we had to figure out how to, first of all, teach with art virtually, and also how to really address the crisis that the student body was experiencing of a lot of the students were dispersed, heading home. Not everybody on the student body was on campus at all times. And so there was the added motivation of how do we also encourage and cultivate a sense of belonging among the student body as we're teaching with art objects. And so the method crystallized due to that need, and it's drawing on years of experience as a museum educator and as a meditation facilitator. The study for being present with art was conducted during the fall semester of 2020. It was a virtual study. Hannah was on board of 2021, and she will be speaking about her experience of conducting the data analysis for the study. The article that we are sharing today was published at the end of 2024, And so between the method's crystallization in 2020 and the article being published and today, the method has been applied to the academic and encyclopedic collections at the Yale University Art Gallery, the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, and the Musei Capitolini in Rome. So I'll speak a little bit more about that, about working with different collections and also working in different formats, but we can move forward. All right, so the being present with art method has three ingredients. The ingredients are our mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation, art, and when we talk about art here, it's primarily visual art objects. And the third ingredient is museum education exercises. So being present with art, or this acronym that you'll see a lot during the presentation, BPWA, is a method for curating mindfulness meditation with artwork and group education exercises. Let's move forward. So why mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation? Many of you on this call are probably very familiar with it. For those of you who are curious about MBSR, it was developed by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn in 1970. It is primarily structured as an 8 to 10 week evidence-based program. This program really emphasizes the practice and developing the practice over the course of 8 to 10 weeks. And there's a lot of emphasis on practicing awareness through such anchors as the breath or maybe a sound in the room, and keeping returning on to this practice. So again, it's almost like you're developing a muscle over the course of these 8 to 10 weeks. MBSR, because it's been around since 1970, we are very, very fortunate that there is extensive body of research on the way that it impacts participants. There have been clinical studies that show that different patients navigating their health plans actually report lower perceived levels of stress, of perceived levels of even pain as they undergo MBSR. It is a non-denominational form of meditation, which means that anybody can practice it. It's not necessarily considered a specific religious meditation, though it is rooted in Buddhism. And Dr. John Kabat-Zinn continues to be a practitioner of Buddhism. I wanted to mention here that sometimes meditation gets discussed as tuning out or maybe bypassing experience. And Kabat-Zinn actually just recently gave a presentation the day before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday this year, before Inauguration Day, all about mindfulness in action, and emphasize that mindfulness and MBSR, it's really, the meditation is our shared life on earth. We practice in order to actually be more engaged. And here's a quote on screen: "The real Sangha, or community of practice, is life on this shared planet," right? So it's not about tuning out, it's actually about practicing presence, being really grounded in the present moment so that we can be more engaged. Next slide, please. Why museum education? So museum education, this is very generally speaking. Museum educators focus on how groups of different people experience art museums and art. When we think about the different roles that take place in a museum, there are curators. Curators oftentimes focus on the care of the object, thinking about the stories that objects tell, curating exhibitions. Visitor experience oftentimes focuses on the individual visitor or groups of visitors who know each other, right? So the family or the group of friends who decides to come to a museum. Educators are oftentimes thinking about how do groups of people who probably the individuals don't know each other, maybe are coming from very different backgrounds, and maybe have very different accessibility needs and point of different experiences. How do they all come together around art? So here's a kind of a working definition of what I see museum education can offer. And I view that it's a way where different people can find common ground and a transformative experience through a facilitated encounter with an artwork. And so this finding common ground became very, very interested with the being present with art method when it felt as though maybe folks during the COVID-19 pandemic didn't really have an experience of a common ground. This continues to be a very relevant concern, especially as we navigate, at the very least, a perceived political divide of, and there are studies to back this up, that there's a feeling as though there's really little common ground that people can find across the political spectrum in this day and age. And let's bring a bit more detail here. Yes, thank you. And so museum education has a lot of tools in its toolkit. One such tool is, for instance, visual thinking strategy. It is an inquiry-based way of engaging with art. And it has been shown to actually really be very beneficial to medical training. So a visual thinking strategy will oftentimes be introduced to physicians as a way of really getting super clear as to what they describe. It has an application to improve the potential to diagnose. Visual thinking strategy has also been applied to anti-bias training because it slows down visual perception. It's also been applied to team building, conflict management, and meaning making. What's really important here, again, is that it's about how we make meaning in a group, how we make meaning with other people, and how we make meaning that impacts others. So here's the museum education component. Let's move forward. The role of curation in being present with art. I wouldn't say that this is a method that can be applied to every single art object. It has very flexible application. It is, again, it has a wide range of application. But as curators of deciding what kind of object is being used and which genre of meditation is being used, it does require some sensitivity and intentionality. So why is curation important to this? Well, first of all, it's the cultural sensitivity and appropriateness of the object selected. So as an example, I would not apply the being present with art method to, for instance, an object that is very deeply contextualized in the Yoruba tradition. And what we know of it is that it was used in an initiation ceremony, right? So I think that the context of the art object should always be considered. There's a lot, again, flexibility in the method, but if anybody wants to talk about this more during the discussion, I'd love to. But again, there is an intentional curation here. Another component of it is that the selection of the art object is about selecting a quote unquote agile object. So agile object is a term developed by Senta German and Jim Harris. This was a term article published in the Museum Journal of Museum Education in 2017. And the way that they define an agile object is an object that has many entry points so that people of different backgrounds can engage with it. It's not about selecting a quote unquote masterpiece just because it is, it has proven to be a very popular over time. It's oftentimes about selecting an object that is very kind of materially, visually rich. There's something really interesting about it. It seems to invite you to ask questions, and it opens up onto really interesting information about the objects. But probably the most simple way of defining it is it's an object with many different entry points. So here on screen, you actually see me teaching at the Wordle Study Center at the Yale University Art Gallery with a Fred Eversley polyester resin parabolic lens. So the object that you see in the center of this image is actually a functional parabolic lens, which means that as people walk around it, you get to look at things and everything starts to get distorted. It has a lot of really interesting colors. And the object was made by Fred Eversley, an artist who was a NASA engineer who became disillusioned with the space race. And as a Black man, had a lot of questions as to what do I make? What do I make? And how do I approach color? So this is just to get a sense of, this is an object that's very rich in how people interact with it. And it also has a rich story that can be unpacked over the course of the session. This is an object that I love teaching in person. I would not teach it virtually because it is an object that really benefits from people moving around in shared space with. So that's another component of curation, right? You want to pick the object that is best suited for the format. Let's proceed. So here's an overview of how the curriculum is structured. What we studied in the research study were 4 sessions. Session 1 was looking at art. It combined a body scan with an artwork that had a landscape component, and the pedagogical exercise was close looking. And so here it's actually outlined which MBSR meditation we chose, what were the guidelines for selecting the artwork, and the pedagogical exercise used. A note about the MBSR meditation selected. I basically took a look at MBSR from my facilitation of MBSR meditation since 2014. So I practiced as a facilitator. I became a facilitator in 2014, and I've been working with them with the structure since then. And I found that there are genres to the meditation, which I call the body scan meditation, the equanimity meditation, which is about finding evenness of mind, the mountain meditation. If you're a practitioner, you can actually think about, oh, there's a very specific meditation where you imagine yourself as a mountain. And then loving kindness, which is all about receiving and giving love. So being really, really open to giving and receiving love. The way that this is structured is that I find that loving kindness is a very, very vulnerable meditation. You have to work yourself up to this. If this is the first kind of meditation I'm introducing to a group, there's probably some resistance to it or discomfort. Whereas if it's the last one in a series, there's a lot more openness. So the way that this is organized is around first grounding the individual within their own body, and then increasingly being more open to the group. At the same time, every single individual session has a collaborative interactive component. And so I have offered this both as a 4-session curriculum, and we can also talk about the fact that I would also love to offer it as a 6-session curriculum. But I've also offered individual sessions that are very effective, and I find that certain ones are more effective for different audiences. Let's move forward. And this method has been applied to at least 3 different collections. I am highlighting here both as a tremendous thank you to my collaborators at each site. And so I really want to thank everybody at the Yale University Art Gallery for their support as I developed the method, and especially at the Barnes Foundation for being so open to playing around with different formats to this method. But here you see a range of collections. The Yale University Art Gallery is an encyclopedic collection, which means that it spans a lot of time and cultures. The Barnes Foundation is a public collection that reflects the taste, right, of the initial collector, Barnes, and has a primary focus on modern art, though there's a lot of range there too. And the Museo Capitolini collection has a lot of antiquities also going up to the Italian Renaissance. You also see the range of format from virtual, where everybody is virtually, including myself. You'll see that there's a hybrid option with the Barnes Foundation. That's where I was actually physically in the galleries, but the students tuned in via a pretty amazing tech setup that the Barnes has, also offered in person. And you also see the audience. So the audience has ranged from students, undergrad, graduate, professional students, to members of the public, primarily adults, and a focus on nursing graduate students and also international physicians. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to dig deeper into the study and our findings. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of that amazing information about the methodology here. I am going to kind of switch focus more into the research side of things and explain from a scientific viewpoint the setup of the study that allowed us to collect data, interpret that data. So the students that were enrolled in the program from the research perspective were either part of a Group A or a Group B, two different cohorts here. We utilized a waitlist control. That's essentially a control that ensures that everyone who is part of the study gets to experience the intervention, here being the mindfulness intervention, but still allows for us to control for other factors. And so as you can see, those who participated were randomized and either participated during the month of October or ended up participating during the month of November. An additional benefit of this methodology is for that first cohort, it allowed for us to assess whether or not any impacts on our measures persisted for a month after the study ended, basically determining whether or not the intervention had benefits outside of the period of the actual study. I will be talking about two different sets of results here. One is the results comparing benefits from the complete start of the participating in the program to the end of the program. I'll call those overall. And I'll also be looking at the impact of each individual session on participants. There were three different metrics used in this study. The first was that we wanted to determine the overall effect of BPWA on stress. That was assessed with a pretty well-validated stress scale, the perceived stress scale. We also investigated mindfulness with, again, a well-validated scale, the mindfulness attention awareness scale. However, there was a very kind of robust interest in understanding connectedness. Again, this was during the fall of 2020, and so all students at Yale were fully remote. There was a huge initiative at Yale during that period of time called the Belonging Initiative. However, to assess connectedness, there was not kind of the validation done to create a robust scale. So instead here, it was really just assessed with a single question. Very simple, indicate the degree to which you currently feel connected to the Yale community, where folks answered with a Likert scale response of 1, not at all, to 5, being very connected to Yale. So for this portion, the way the analysis was conducted, it was with a pretty long form survey that the students took at 3 different periods, before, after, and follow-up for that cohort 1, or time point 1, time point 2 after a waitlist where they hadn't actually been part of the study, and then after participation in the study. What I essentially first looked at was just using an ANOVA analysis to determine in these longer form surveys whether or not participating in BPWA had any impact on, again, stress, mindfulness, and connectedness. So what we found first was that students are stressed. This is well documented, but college students always have essentially a much higher reported average stress on the PSS, pardon me. However, we observed a really robust reduction in self-reported stress after participating in BPWA. For mindfulness, we observed an increase in self-reported mindfulness after participating in BPWA, and a trend, but a not significant trend, for an increase in self-reported connectedness to Yale. Again, this is not a validated scale, though, so I wouldn't read into this too much. One thing of note, though, is the wait list design of the study. Ideally, that would have allowed us to ensure control for time effects, ensure that there were, no differences in group 2's self-reported stress, mindfulness, and connectedness during the period where they're not participating. The problem here was that we had a pretty small sample size. I'll be talking about this at the end, but essentially in cohort 1, While there was, if just from a cohort level, an impact on stress, and we were able to thus use the waitlist design as intended and confirm that, you know, there was an impact on stress in group 1 during this first month, but not on group 2. The same was not true for the mindfulness. When separating out the groups because of that low sample size, group 1 only trended on its own to have an increase in self-reported mindfulness. And so we were not able to utilize the waitlist design. This just comes down to sample size. If we had had a larger sample size, I'm very confident it would have worked. The other thing, though, is because of the more robust impacts on stress, we were able to confirm that the reduction in stress from that 1 month participation, just 4 sessions of BPWA, 1 month after, students still had those benefits of that reduction in self-reported stress at that 3rd time point, which is really great. Some of our struggles with sample size were ameliorated in looking at the impacts of each individual session. Now, before and after each individual session, instead of a super long form survey using those validated scales, students were asked to fill out just a really short 3-question survey asking them to self-report, you know, how stressed do you currently feel on a scale of 1 to 5? How aware of the present moment do you currently feel, as a 1-question assessment of mindfulness? And then again, how connected to the Yale community do you currently feel, all on Likert scales of 1 to 5. So this analysis is just looking at before and after any individual session, how students self-reported. And we observed a very robust reduction in self-reported stress, an increase in self-reported mindfulness, and an increase in self-reported connectedness. Now, I'll say, for anyone who would like to talk more about the statistics here, I'm happy to do so. We ran a whole bunch of ANOVAs looking at metrics like which cohort folks were part of, what type of student, whether they were an undergrad or a graduate student, and also their location relative to Yale in the moment, whether or not they were living on campus, but still fully remote, in New Haven, but not on campus or away from New Haven. Along with, for each analysis, looking at the session number. I'll kind of just tell you, though, that none of those effects, even if they did exist, interacted with the before and after to kind of impact the magnitude of BPWA's impact, again, on self-reported stress, mindfulness, and connectedness. Finally, I just want to bring up a couple of the limitations of this study. So the first limitation that was really, really kind of impactful was attrition. While the study started by enrolling 90 students, we were only able to include in analysis students that, at minimum, completed those long-form surveys before and after participating in the sessions. So that brought us down to 54 students. So pretty high attrition, even just in getting folks to fill out those surveys. When we wanted to kind of look and control the more robust design of a waitlist control, we had more attrition of just students not answering all 3 of those long-form surveys. So that was kind of a big limitation of the study. A couple other components that were interesting challenges from a study design perspective was that I came in at the end and not at the beginning of the study design. And so because of that, I was not responsible for actually coding up anything in Qualtrics. This led to a small programming error such that the cohorts were not actually balanced in terms of sample size. Just a small thing there. The other thing is that, again, that measure of connectedness has not been validated across 20 or 30 or 40 years of research, like the scales used to assess stress and mindfulness. And then finally, I just have to always have a call out because of my PhD past. This study, if it was ever repeated, would have been fantastic to look at biological measures of stress and mindfulness, for example, looking at something like cortisol. So those are things that I think would be fantastic in the future. However, I think that given the fact that we ended with such a relatively small sample size compared to the beginning of the study, still observing those robust impacts, in particular on self-reported stress, is kind of incredible. It just shows you how large of an impact participating in BPWA had on the students who participated. And in particular, I would love to highlight how those effects persisted for a month after stopping being part, no longer having these weekly sessions with Roksana. So those metrics just show you kind of, if this persisted in this small scale study, how fantastic it will be when this can be replicated one day with a larger cohort. With that, I will pass it back over to Roksana for a demonstration of the method.
Thanks so much, Hannah. So you may be wondering, okay, but what is this method actually? And so Hannah and I figured that we can actually demonstrate it. So the most important thing for the next 15 minutes or so is to get as comfortable as possible. So I'll be speaking a little bit just to kind of get settled in. Just know that this is a great time to get a sip of water. You take anything that you need. I always say, like, notice if you are too warm, not warm enough, right? Take what you need. And I just want to acknowledge that we are gathering in this format. So maybe you have email open, maybe you have Slack open. Notice if it would help to actually close it for the next 15 minutes so that you can really give yourself this time to experience the demonstration. We're going to begin with the guided meditation, and then we're going to do the short, the education exercise, which will involve drawing. So it's great to have a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil nearby. And then we'll just kind of introduce the discussion question, but the discussion can continue in the chat. So just know that there are those three components. For the meditation, there is no right or wrong way to meditate. So I will have my eyes closed as I'm facilitating the meditation. You're very welcome to close your eyes as well. Again, that's super, super helpful if you have other things on screen distracting you. But if you have found in the past that it doesn't really feel comfortable to be with your eyes closed, it's wonderful to leave a soft gaze, just allowing your environment to become blurry, or to look at a solid point in your space. If you choose to select the solid point, I'm going to ask you not to go with a clock, because then you are going to be watching time pass. But just note, there's no right or wrong way here, and the goal is for you to be as comfortable as possible. So let's practice. Just know that you are not missing anything on screen. I just closed my eyes, and so you may wish to close your eyes too. And take a moment to intentionally shift your perspective from the screen, from all that content that you just saw on screen, to your inner state. Notice any sensations. Notice any feelings. And without feeling the need to judge or share or analyze, just notice. Allowing any feelings to bubble up and just to release the feeling. I'm going to invite you to bring some gentle movement to your body to actually arrive in greater stillness. If it feels good, you may wish to roll your shoulder blades up and down your back. And you may wish to do this a few times. Maybe imagining that you are shrugging off a cloak, an energetic cape, releasing anything that you do not need to be carrying right now. Maybe bring some gentle movement to the neck, bringing each ear to each respective shoulder. Bringing some flexibility there, some play. And I invite you to unclench your jaw. So open and close the mouth a few times, each time unclenching the jaw. And then imagine all the muscles of the face relaxing, taking the strain out from around your eyes. You may even wish to imagine that you are wearing a mask and that the mask is just sliding off of your face. You do not have to be anything particular right now, just be here exactly as you are. And now bring your attention to the left side of your face. That entire left side of your face. Begin to shift your perspective to the left side of your neck, the left shoulder, the left bicep, the left forearm, the left hand, the palm, the thumb, the pointer finger, the middle finger, the ring finger, the pinky. Noticing any sensations in your left palm. Now the left forearm, the left elbow, the left shoulder. Notice the left side of your chest. Maybe breathe into the left side of your chest. The left side of the belly. The left lower back. The left hip. The left seat. Left thigh. Left knee. Left shin. Left foot. Notice the entire left side of your body. And now bring your attention to the right foot, the right ankle, the right shin, the right knee, the right thigh, the right seat, the right lower back, the right mid back, the right upper back, the right shoulder. Notice the right elbow, the right wrist, the right palm, the right thumb, the right pointer finger, the right middle finger, the right ring finger, and the right pinky. Notice the sensations in your right palm. Scan up your right forearm, back right up to the right shoulder. Notice the right side of your neck, the right side of the chin, your right cheek, your right ear, your right eye, the right side of your forehead, and then the right side of your head. And now bring to mind the entire right side of your body. Notice the right side of your body. And now imagine that there is a line going down the center of your body, and bring your attention to that center line where left and right meet. Your body is a dynamic space, and you take up space. Bring your attention to your entire body now, and maybe bring some gentle movement to the body, maybe rolling out the wrists, maybe rolling out the neck. And ever so gently, if you have your eyes closed, begin to open your eyes, reconnecting to the screen, taking anything you need. So maybe taking that sip of water or maybe stretching. But together we're looking at a photograph of an artwork. It is a large scale artwork that would hang inside of a gallery directly on the wall. Just take a moment to allow your eyes to scan across the screen and notice what you notice. We're going to take a look at a detail of this artwork. We're now looking closely at a component of the left side of this artwork. And if you have a pen or a pencil, this is a great time to grab it. Just note, it's not required. You can absolutely do this with your gaze. But take a line, find a line on screen, and take it for a walk. Notice where that line leads you, whether with your gaze or by drawing. And if it seems like you reach the end of the line, find an intersecting line and take it for a walk. Follow it with your gaze while drawing. We're going to take another look, this time even closer, zooming in on this artwork. And for this, everybody will be invited to draw directly on screen using the annotate feature. So the way that it appears on my screen is when I bring my mouse, my cursor, to the screen, I see a little green icon of a pencil. It pops up as annotate, and you can hit that, select a color, select a line width. I see that we're starting to have people join us. And so pick a line and take it for a walk. I'm going to repeat the directions for anyone who may have missed them. Please take your cursor and hover it over your screen. You'll notice in the lower left-hand corner, there is an icon of a little pencil drawing a line. If you click on it, you can select the color, the width of your line, and feel free to draw directly on screen. You find that you reach the end of a line or the end of a shape, you are welcome to choose another line and take it for a walk. I'm going to do this exercise for about 1 more minute. So if anybody hasn't yet drawn, there's still time to jump in. Find a place where you can leave your line. And we're going to go to the next image to look even closer at this work. And if anybody wants to add their responses, observations in the chat, this is wonderful. You're very, very welcome to. And so we're zooming in even closer on this work. This is an artwork that was made collaboratively. The artist, Marie Watt, a member of the Seneca tribe, employs sewing circles as part of her practice. She'll oftentimes begin a piece and then invite museum attendees to join her, regardless of sewing ability, regardless of comfort with needle and thread. So just notice all the little tiny stitches as we zoom in closer. I love it. People are still drawing on screen. So we're going to move forward to now take a look at the overarching artwork. And I know it's super, super tempting, but I'm going to say if you would like to continue drawing, please continue drawing on a notepad. I hope that this exercise will invite you to keep drawing today. But now we've zoomed out. There's still a stray little neon thread, I see, and some stray drawers. So now we're zooming back out to look at the overarching artwork. And so at this point in the exercise, if we were doing a being present with art method, we would open this up for discussion. I would probably, the first question that I would ask would probably just be, what do you notice about this artwork? I would also ask the questions that you see on screen. What did you notice about the artwork while drawing? How did the meditation impact your experience? And over the course of the discussion, we would unpack this artwork together. Here, I'm going to introduce the title of this artwork, and it's actually in two parts. There's a left part and a right part. And so you have the artist's name, Marie Watt. It's called First Teachers Balance the Universe. Part 1 on the left are Things That Fly, Predator. And on the right, we have First Things Balance the Universe, Part 2, Prey. It's made of reclaimed wool blankets, embroidery, floss, and thread, and it's part of the Yale University Art Gallery collection that both Hannah and I taught with. I thoroughly, thoroughly, thoroughly encourage everyone of the participants, if you want to talk about this artwork, please share your experience of what did it feel like to collaboratively draw on the screen? And what did it feel like to do the meditation that we did with this artwork? Please put it in the chat. We are now shifting our component of this presentation. Oh, I love it. Mira said following the line was so soothing. Wonderful. Yes, please keep sharing your reflections, everybody. I am going to now invite James to come back on screen so that James can moderate a discussion. And just know, again, we will be moderating the chat if anybody has questions about the artwork or the exercises that we did. What we did was session 2. It was a snippet of session 2, which is drawing with art. We paired the equanimity meditation, which is finding or cultivating an evenness of mind among opposites. We are in a cumulative moment where there's a lot going on. And so I oftentimes use this meditation for such moments. We did a drawing exercise and we engaged with an artwork that has strong symmetrical elements. All right. Thank you so much, James.
Roksana, Hannah, wow, what an incredible journey you took us on. First from a kind of overview of the work, and then a description of the assessment of that work scientifically, and then an immersion into the work, which I have to say, I was surprised at how powerful that was. And I wonder if you could say something, Roksana, about, I noticed that you spent quite a bit of time on the kind of somatic mindfulness part of it, so much so that in my mind, I thought, oh, I guess we're not going to do any kind of artwork. I guess she's just demonstrating the somatic piece of it. And then you came back to the artwork. That kind of care and time spent is not what we usually experience in an art museum, where you get off the bus or you get out of the taxi or you get out of the parking garage, you go in, there's the artwork, you maybe take a selfie. Can you say something about the intentionality and the effectiveness in your experience of that kind of unhurried preparation?
Thank you so much, James. So museum education has done a really beautiful job of encouraging participants of slowing down while already in front of an artwork. So I'm very much influenced by, the really wonderful museum educators who practice close looking, and of course, visual thinking strategy is also really anchored into that practice of we're slowing down, we're looking. What I found over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what I continue to find, is that the groups that I work with have a hard time arriving. And so the introduction or the contribution really of being present with art is recognizing that it might take people a really long time to actually arrive, especially in a group setting. Some people might feel uncomfortable in a group setting. And so the somatic component encourages, there are cues, right, about being aware of, well, what are you feeling? And also, a feeling safe in your body and a feeling safe in the space that you are. So part of that is, again, I think the nervousness around gathering in groups continues to be a component post COVID-19. Another component of the somatics that's I find very important in our present moment, that's going to continue for a while, is that, and people describe this as such, we are in a bit of a culture war moment, where people are coming in with some very fixed perspectives. And so the act of introducing a somatic practice really encourages people to notice, what are you bringing to this session? Are you angry? Did you just read something on your phone that really kind of collapsed, you internally, right? So there's this self-awareness before we even engage as a group. So it's building on the really beautiful work that's already present about encouraging people to slow down in front of an artwork and just really introducing that somatic component. The other thing that I would also say is that, thank you, James, that you brought this up, is that there is the transition, right? Sometimes when I just talk about the being present with art method, it can kind of feel like, oh, there's meditation, and then we do an activity, but it's actually all about really smooth transitions. And so it's very much designed so that we continuously deepen into the group experience, as opposed to, all right, everybody's on. What do you think? What do you think? Right? So it's the transitions are very important.
Thank you. Really, really fascinating. Another thing, Roksana, that struck me about this practice is the communal nature of it. And I know that in the West, I think most of us would think of an artwork as being done by an artist. probably in their studio by themselves, or maybe in front of a landscape, but by themselves, right? And I think we oftentimes view artwork in a similar kind of way. You go to an art museum, shh, don't talk, you got to be quiet and just kind of by yourself go through this. And part of what struck me was the power of doing this collectively, and very creatively finding tools I didn't know we had available to us on Zoom to allow us to do that. It reminds me of some of the indigenous practices, and you mentioned indeed the work of Marie Watt. I'm thinking about indigenous practices, for example, in Australia, where artworks are done not vertically, but horizontally many times. And people can, it's a group effort where people are contributing to this. So I wonder if you can say something about the power of that communal experience. And I can't help channeling a question that Sarah had in the chat. And how do you do this when it's face to face? I'm assuming you're not allowed actually to go up and draw on the work itself. So how do you do it in a face to face context?
So many good questions. I'll answer that last one first, I think. So yeah, we always want to be creative and very, very mindful of the format. So I think that when it comes to museum education and encounters with an artwork, there are obviously shortcomings to doing something hybrid or virtually. My approach is let's get creative with the tools available. And so Zoom has a lot of shortcomings, but actually it has this really quite radical opportunity to draw directly on an artwork, right? We would never be drawing on an artwork, right? Please do not do this after this session. The ways that you could do this in an artwork is you could actually have a very large printout of the work and encourage everybody to draw directly onto that printout while also looking. What's really powerful about that is that everybody's really aware of their positioning in space and starting from a different part and probably meeting in the middle. So there are very direct ways of not just drawing on your own sheet of paper, but also doing a collaborative drawing. And then, yeah, I love the question about the collaborative nature of art making. I would say that if we take a look at all of art, it is unusual that we perceive art as individually made because throughout history, throughout cultures, it is much more likely that something is made collaboratively, whether, for instance, in an indigenous context. Also, I'm thinking of like South African beadwork where, it's women gathering and people are talking and they're talking about their lovers as they're creating these South African beadwork pieces, purses, etc. Right? There's like a storytelling component to the art making, and that's communal. We also know about workshops, right? Many, many artists, even from like the time that we think that there is the genius or the individual artist creator, are actually working in a workshop. Also, artists look to other artists, right? Maybe the other influence isn't in the room with the artist studio, but artists are very much indebted to everything that's out there, whether we think about it as a canon or just the influences that they look at. So it's really, this method is also seeking to kind of reanimate the museum experience where it can actually feel like there's one specific way of engaging with an artwork, and the artwork is a discrete piece. So especially with artworks that are collaboratively made, it is a method to reanimate that collaborative nature. I also just want to say, Hannah, I love how you're like really active in the chat, and I'm curious if you'd like to add anything to this great question.
One thing that comes in particular because of my history teaching with this piece is the methods by which it was created. So, I happen to know, for example, that those larger, thicker blue lines of embroidery were done by the artist herself. However, Marie Watt likes to work in collaborative sewing circles. So all of the pink lines were done by participants of the public in sewing circles that would come together and be told a story and then given a lot of freedom and flexibility to kind of sew as they liked with whatever style they would enjoy and by whatever colors they were attracted to. And actually part of this being in the museum's exhibition was that she hosted a sewing circle for a new piece while at the art gallery. So that was something that happened during the time that she was visiting the UAG, was that another sewing circle for a future piece occurred at the same period of time. There's also large narrative components to that piece, which we didn't really touch on. As you can imagine, you can kind of see how you could spend an hour with just one piece, but a very different version of teaching of this same piece through a different lens was we would do a stories and art program every Saturday morning for our youngest visitors. We transitioned this online. I was checking it. It wasn't actually one of the YouTube series. This one is one that I did in person with those youngest visitors. And a large portion of the kind of inspiration for this piece for Marie Watt was the Seneca creation story. And so we would, one of the things that I did during my time there was combine, instead of mindfulness and art pedagogy, narrative components and art pedagogy with our youngest, think 2 and 3 up to maybe 7-year-olds, hearing the same, the story that inspired the artist, and then using the very, very similar components of drawing what they would see, following different lines, and then imagining what they would have embroidered and what they would have added to the piece after they heard that same story. So it just kind of shows the flexibility of the nature. And I really love hearing about how the particular, mindfulness exercise that Roksana chose today, how that maybe impacted what everyone attended to, how that might have been really, really different had she chosen a different mindfulness exercise, or even just a different pedagogical tool in that moment.
That's a great reflection, Hannah. Thank you. And, I think that one of the things that both of you are emphasizing to us, again, is that the way in which we currently tend to engage with art is oftentimes superficial. Oftentimes we really, we walk away from the art museum and we may well be, hopefully, moved and engaged, and yet we're leaving a lot that we could have. I'm mindful of, the practices that we sort of the norms of how to go into an art museum, how to engage with the art that is there. These are not things that have been, these are not natural laws. These are not things that have been, given to us from on high. These are simply human practices. And what you're doing, I think, is encouraging us to rethink some of those practices and to consider how engagement with art can happen at a much deeper and more powerful and more enduring level. So Hannah, a question that I have for you with regard to the research, I was struck not only by the changes that you noted, that you observed right after each session, but the enduring effect of these changes. This is not easy. And so especially in engagement with art, you go into an art museum, it's really powerful and you love it. And then you go out and you get lunch and you go on with your day. And the next day, there may or may not be a whole lot left of at least what we know how to measure easily. And yet with the participants in this study, there was that ongoing 30 days later. I mean, so can you, first of all, just contextualize a little bit about how unusual that is? And secondly, can you maybe hypothesize about what maybe some of the active ingredients were that may have led to that enduring effect?
Yes, I think that's such a good thing to note, is that it is incredibly unusual for any intervention to have that kind of persistent positive impact. And again, I think with even a slightly larger sample size, we would have observed, statistically speaking, the same endurance for mindfulness and for connectedness, especially the stress, though. I always think back to thinking about your goals for any participation in education or engagement in the art gallery. I think about building skills and really changing kind of your viewpoint of the world. I'm even hearing in the way that you're asking this question, the idea that maybe folks after this session will, the next time they visit a museum, look at those pieces in a slightly different way, choose to spend their time a little bit differently, maybe look at fewer pieces, but spend more time with them. And that was really core to the way that we approached education in my time at the Yale University Art Gallery. We thought about our time with students, not about improving their core art history knowledge or kind of imparting facts to them. We thought about it as building skills. And those skills could be as broad for a a class for college students about, really understanding body and motion, to for younger students, oftentimes confidence, self-awareness, ability to verbalize thoughts or concerns. And I think that those same ideas of building skills and not imparting facts are only amplified when you take those art pedagogical tools that everyone at the art gallery used, it, myself included, and pair them with mindful-based stress reduction, as was done in this study. I think those two things together likely led to a really impactful change in how those participants experienced, yes, their time interacting with any kind of physical art object, but also just how they experienced their day-to-day. They were given new tools which allowed them in the long term to improve their stress. And I'll call out, improve their stress 30 days after, when they were in midterm season, like during a normally more stressful time of the semester.
Thank you, Hannah. Really, really fascinating. At this point, let me open it up to anybody in our audience who would like to ask a question. I really appreciate the wonderful comments in the chat. Feel free to raise your Zoom hand. If you have a question for Roksana or Hannah to get in on the conversation. While we're waiting, let me just observe that it feels to me like part of what you're doing, in a sense, could be thought of as democratizing our approach to the arts, because we live in a world where oftentimes it's the blockbusters, it's the, well, I'm not a Picasso, so I'm not an artist, right? With music, we sometimes sing in the shower, whether or not we're willing to admit that. But with drawing, there's not really I guess you could draw on the wall in the shower, but few of us have those kinds of water markers, unless we have toddlers at home. But that idea of engaging, being allowed and being invited in to those spaces, those aesthetic, artistic, and collectively so spaces, I think is part of the power of what you're inviting us into. Mary, I see your hand raised. Welcome. What's on your mind?
Thank you so much, everybody. I just wanted to say how meaningful it was to be directed with so much tender care, even how to annotate, because I think sometimes technology is a little convoluted, or everyone's screen looks a little different, and just saying, very calm. Here, I mean, it was a part of the experience, helping it be inclusive and set me up for success. And I'm so grateful for that. So thank you all. And thanks for setting it all up, James.
Thank you so much, Mary. I think what you just shared also relates to what James observed about the democratizing the experience. That's absolutely the intention here, is recognizing that there are certain limits, whether it's a format or whether, something that could be viewed as a limit, like a format such as Zoom, or maybe that people are stressed out, right, can actually be an opportunity. And in terms of the democratizing component, this is why curation is really integral here. My intention is that there are pieces that both lend themselves to it, that the exercises are really highlighting it, and why MBSR, again, mindfulness, especially in the words of Jon Kabat-Zinn, is actually about activating us and ensuring that we actually have more agency in the world. So it's a thread that goes through all of those components.
Beautiful, thank you. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, thank you both for such a lovely presentation. I actually just wanted to spotlight a question that popped up in the chat. So this is from Zab Johnson. Do you think a somatic mindful meditation makes it more likely that people will engage in a tactile engagement with the art, i.e. drawing on it virtually? Likewise, I wonder if the inner reflective meditations, so third eye perhaps, might make it more likely to see new visual information.
Thank you so much for that question. I'll jump in here. My experience is that if I begin with a somatic practice, yes, people are more inclined to both participate, whether it's unmuting themselves or speaking up or participating in a kind of drawing activity, because you ease into it. Sometimes in a kind of educational context, from my experience, is that if there's an activity that people are just, okay, and now we're doing this, it takes a little bit of time to transition into it. So the somatic practice does help people transition into it. What I'm hearing with your question about the third eye versus this, I will say that this is a big distinction between mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation or other types of meditation, such as transcendental meditation. The goal of the MBSR method is about being really present in the body and the space that you're in, and being very present of your perceptions. Transcendental meditation, I would say, is not there are a lot of amazing applications of it, but the transcendental meditation is about going out, going beyond, right? And so what's really intentional about this method is about using meditation to be increasingly present. I will say I have taught a course on mysticism, spirituality, and modern art at the Barnes Foundation, and we did practice transcendental meditation. So I see a lot of really amazing and exciting applications of transcendental meditation to art. This is just a method about really getting rooted in the body.
So, Roksana, when you showed the different, the detail going in, if you hadn't told me that we were looking at the same work of art, I may well have thought those were three different works, because there's so much layered into that. And the knowing something, as you shared with us, about the story of it and how this piece came to be, really added to the meaning of it and the power of it. And again, I think that speaks to having almost a layering of the experience itself, right? In a way that in some ways we might think of as mirroring the artwork itself. And so we tend to think, kind of the naive perspective, you go into an art museum, you look at an artwork, I've seen it. And of course you haven't, any more than if you go into the library and you look at a book, you've seen, you've read the book. No, you haven't, you've seen the cover, right? And so artwork, I think, is deceptively open, because it's there, it's all there. There's nothing, after an hour looking at this work of art, there's not one thing in the work of art that wasn't there at the beginning. But in our perception, there's so much more that's there than was at the beginning. And obviously this is, just such a great pairing with mindfulness and meditation and the presence of what's actually there versus what we think is there or what's in our mind because we're too busy with all that's going on. So I love this. I love this pairing and the richness of the visual experience, the meditative experience, and really the life lesson. So part of what I imagine would be powerful about this for those who took part in the study is that there's so much that's applicable to life beyond beyond the experience itself of just being in looking with a particular work. So that's another part of it that I think is important to keep in mind. Amber, what are your thoughts? Join us.
Hey, I am seeing a lot of applications for art therapy with this. And one thing that came up for me was wondering, I've heard about like meditations that bring people into awareness in their body. People that have experienced a lot of trauma, that can maybe be triggering for them. And I was just wondering, in your experience, like, if you know that you're working with someone who's experienced a lot of trauma, like, would you deal with that differently? Or is there, just any like tips that you might have for that situation?
Thank you for asking that question. I facilitate meditation in a trauma-informed way. The initial cues that I gave, such as there's no right or wrong way to meditate, giving people the option, you don't have to close your eyes, because actually folks who have experienced trauma, to close your eyes can actually be extremely activating. If your body is not a safe place for you, I would actually not, really push that, right? So this is why there's a lot of flexibility there. So it's a trauma-informed way with, if you actually break down what I do, it's like for every cue, there's probably like 3 options. So it's a little bit of like, it's a guided meditation, but it's very much a choose your own experience meditation.
Roksana, could you tell us a little bit about your preparation from the meditation side? I think I was, more aware of and expecting expertise on the art side, given what your, work has been. And I've been amazed and pleasantly surprised. And obviously you've done a lot of preparation on the meditation side, which has allowed you to come at this pairing in such a deep sort of way. Can you tell us a little bit about that background?
Thank you for that question. So, I was born and raised in Poland, and my father converted to Buddhism, which was a very unusual move at that point, because Poland was, 98% Catholic. And so I actually grew up meditating. So it was something that I did. And I found that over the course of being a student and, an undergraduate student, graduate student, I really lapsed in my meditation practice, and I felt it. And so it was actually around taking my comprehensive exams for the doctorate that I realized I think I need to get back into meditating. And so it was in 2014, taking my comprehensive exams, reading 100 plus books. I was also taking a mindfulness MBSR course through Jefferson University, and then I got the official training to be a facilitator. And it consolidated a lot for me, just because I realized, this is a ritual it's a practice that I grew up with, and I really just let it slide. And so since 2014, I have been incorporating MBSR meditation to classroom teaching. So teaching within the university level, it was oftentimes around midterms finals that we would actually start with a meditation. And it was, I would say, around 2016, when I was a fellow at the Barnes Foundation, that I started to incorporate mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation to the start of my teaching sessions at the Barnes, because it was a stressful time that we are looping back around to.
Well, thank you, Roksana. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us. We're getting close to the end of our time. I just want to ask you, Roksana, there are a lot, just judging by my own feelings and also by what folks have said in the chat, people want more. Like, this was really powerful, beautiful, wonderful. Are there ways that people can get more, either through resources that you have available, or are there practices that you recommend that people can do on their own that are adjacent to this work?
Thank you. And I do see that Hannah made some suggestions. So those are really great. So first of all, just really, if you're an individual visiting a museum, just deciding to take in less work rather than more. The exercise of what we just did, if we really abstract it, focusing in, how am I feeling right now? What are the sensations that I have? Maybe focusing on an anchor, which is the breath, and then close looking. I will say that, so right now I teach at the Barnes Foundation. We don't have the next being present with art session on the calendar. I'm doing a session that's actually integrating the sound bowls into gallery teaching. It's called Listening with Art. And the goal there is to really reanimate the atmospheric nature of the Impressionists through really close listening and really close looking. So that's coming up. I believe it's Monday, February 24th, and it's open registration. It's available to anybody. In regards to being present with art, you know, the article was just published in August 2024 last year. And since there, I am starting to get people to ask me, how do I learn this method? And I would say if you're interested in this actually being something that's taught at your institution, I'm certainly open to it. I always go where the work is needed. So I will just say this is a practice that is accessible to all just by tuning into your own body, noticing sensations, feelings, looking, maybe incorporating drawing. You can do this anytime. But if it's something that you would like to bring to your museum with your collection, I'm certainly open to it because I'm happy to share this.
Terrific. Thank you, Roksana. And Hannah, I want to give the last question to you before I was able to ask it, though I see it's already come up in the chat. So I just want to give you a chance to elaborate a little bit. You mentioned that this initial study was, you know, it's astonishing and limited in certain ways. Perhaps the biggest thing is the small sample size. So if you were granted unlimited funds and sources and resources and so forth for this, what would you like to see as a follow-up study?
Yeah, I would love to start with just a much more comprehensive and larger scale study across multiple universities. I think that's kind of the first replication. I would also love to be able to directly show that BPWA has a combinatorial impact on these metrics. In particular, combinatorial is greater than the sum of its parts. So would love to observe, you know, a group that just participates in a VTS-based intervention, a group that just participates in a mindfulness-based stress reduction intervention, and really be able to observe how these come together. I think we feel this, and we observed it in the study, but I haven't been able to, of course, actually conduct the study that would be needed to show this. I, as someone who has more of a kind of biological systems background, would also love to be able to pair a program like this with something where we would be collecting non-invasive biological samples that are biological markers of something like stress. So hair can be collected to look at levels of cortisol, for example. And then after that, I think, you know, I started off by saying when I first showed you those results, students are known to be incredibly stressed, especially college students. And so it will be very interesting to look at this with the other kind of populations that Roksana has already been so involved in. You know, our healthcare workers experience incredibly high levels of stress. Other industries where stress is already at such a high baseline would be fantastic. And then kind of after a lot of applications to run a similar study with the general population and to kind of be able to observe the impacts, especially on stress for other individuals. And then down the line, look at interventions for anxiety. You know, I think that it'd be fantastic to be able to kind of look at those clinical applications one day.
Well, fantastic. I certainly hope you find the resources to be able to do this because it's much needed research and much needed practice. And I'm mindful that pairing mindfulness-based stress reduction strategies with other kinds of approaches can be very powerful, can even be more powerful than just mindfulness-based stress reduction on its own. For example, my colleague Ryan Nemec has explored mindfulness-based strengths practice and had a study comparing, or at least one study comparing that with just mindfulness-based stress reduction on its own. And the strengths practice version actually outperformed the mindfulness-based stress reduction. So there's a lot to build on this magnificent platform of MBSR. Well, with that, we are alas out of time. Thanks so much to Dr. Roksana Filipowska and Hannah Weinberg-Wolf for joining us today and giving us such thoughtful presentations and insightful answers to our questions. Feel free to add any words of thanks you would like to in the chat as well as we wrap up. I'd also like to thank Catherine Cotter, Associate Director of Research, and Sarah Sidoti, Associate Director of Operations of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, for all of their work behind the scenes. Finally, thanks to each of you for joining us today. It's been great to have you with us. We will be having another In Conversation colloquium series before long. Please make sure to stay tuned to the newsletter, our Humanities and Human Flourishing Project newsletter, for more information about that. Sarah has just again put the link into the chat for more information on this and other work that we do, other upcoming colloquium sessions. We invite you to sign up for our free newsletter by visiting that website. Well, thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you, and be well.